Hello, survivors. Before we dive into today's story, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. Let's start the story. Hill Ridge isn't much to look at. 43 mobile homes scattered across 6 acres of former farmland, connected by gravel roads that turn to mud when it rains. Most folks here are just trying to get by. Truck drivers between routes, single mothers stretching every dollar, retirees on fixed incomes. The kind of people society tends to forget exist, but they're good people. And over the years, this place had become more than just cheap housing. It was home. Around 4 in the afternoon, I was fixing a loose step on Dolores Gunn's porch when I heard the first gunshot. It came from the direction of Highway 89, maybe half a mile away. Dolores, a 72-year-old former school teacher who'd lived in Lot 18 for 8 years, looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Hunters?" she asked, adjusting her reading glasses. "Could be," I said. Though hunting season wasn't for another 2 weeks, the shot had sounded different somehow. Sharper. More urgent than the lazy weekend hunting I was used to hearing. 10 minutes later, another shot. Then another. I walked to the edge of the property where I could see the highway through the tree line. Traffic was moving, but there seemed to be more cars than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. A few were moving fast, faster than they should have been on that old 2-lane road. My radio crackled to life. Evan Amell, one of our long-haul truckers, was calling from Lot 31. "Lion, you copy? Something weird's happening out on the interstate. Just heard on the CB that there's some kind of incident in town. Multiple incidents, actually." I walked over to Evan's double-wide, finding him hunched over his CB radio, the antenna extending 20 feet into the air. Evan was built like the trucks he drove, solid, dependable, and tough as nails. He'd been living here for 3 years, parking his rig in the back lot between runs. "What kind of incidents?" I asked. Evan adjusted the frequency, static filling the small space. "Hard to say. Drivers are reporting roadblocks, emergency vehicles everywhere. One guy said he saw people attacking each other near the Walmart on Route 12. Thought it might be some kind of riot." The CB squawked with a trucker's voice. "Avoid downtown Springfield entirely. Police have it cordoned off. Something about a medical emergency, but I'm telling you, what I saw didn't look medical. Saw a man get tackled by 3 people, and they weren't trying to restrain him. They were... Jesus, I can't even describe it." A chill ran through me. Springfield was only 15 miles south of us. "Lion?" Robbie Wesker's voice carried across the park. She was jogging toward us, her 8-year-old daughter Lucy trailing behind. Robbie lived in Lot 7, worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, and never panicked about anything. But now her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "The TV's showing some kind of emergency broadcast," she said, breathing hard. "They're telling people to stay indoors, avoid contact with anyone showing signs of infection, they called it." We hurried to Robbie's trailer, where her old television was tuned to the local news. The anchor, a woman I'd seen for years delivering cheerful morning updates, looked haggard and frightened. "Reports are still coming in from across the Tri-County area. The CDC has issued a statement advising all residents to remain in their homes until further notice. Symptoms of the infection include aggressive behavior, high fever, and in extreme cases, violent attacks on others. If you encounter anyone displaying these symptoms, do not approach them. Contact emergency services immediately." The broadcast cut to shaky cell phone footage of what looked like a parking lot. A woman in a nurse's uniform was on the ground while 2 men in hospital gowns seemed to be... I couldn't process what I was seeing. The men moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their faces blank except for in terrible intensity. When one of them turned toward the camera, his mouth was dark with something that looked like blood. "Mom?" Lucy Reeser's small voice broke the silence. "What's wrong with those people?" Robbie pulled her daughter closer but didn't answer. None of us knew what to say. The broadcast returned to the anchor. "We're now receiving reports that several hospitals in the region have been evacuated. The National Guard has been activated, and Governor Williams will be addressing the state at 6 p.m. We repeat, stay indoors, avoid contact with infected individuals, and await further instructions. Then the screen went black. Robbie tried the other channels, but they were either showing the same emergency message or nothing at all. Evan went back to his CB, but the chatter had become increasingly frantic and incoherent. "Lion," Evan said, "we need to think about defense. If this thing is spreading, and if it's as bad as what we're hearing." I nodded. Evan was right, and I was grateful he was here. Military background, level head under pressure, and he knew about security. But defense meant admitting that whatever was happening wasn't going to be contained by the authorities. "Who's got weapons?" I asked. "I've got my 30-06 and a pistol," Evan said. "Robbie?" "A 38 revolver," she said quietly. "It was my ex-husband's." I mentally inventoried what I knew about my residents. "The retired factory worker in Lot 12 has several hunting rifles. Those brothers in Lot 44 have shotguns. They're duck hunters. Dolores used to be married to a cop, she might have something. And I think the guy in Lot 27 has a collection of handguns." As if summoned by our conversation, Sully Eckhart appeared at Robbie's door. Sully was 63, a retired factory worker who'd moved here 5 years ago after his wife passed. He was carrying his Winchester rifle and had a grim expression. "You folks seeing the news?" he asked. "Because I just saw something that ain't on any broadcast." He gestured toward the tree line that separated us from the farm next door. "Billy Hendricks came stumbling out of those woods about 10 minutes ago. At first I thought he was drunk or hurt, but when I called out to him..." Sully paused, running his hand through his gray hair. "He didn't respond like a person should. He just turned toward my voice and started walking in my direction. Real slow, but determined. And his eyes. There was something wrong with his eyes." "Where is he now?" Evan asked, already reaching for his sidearm. "I went inside to get my rifle. When I came back out, he was gone." Through Robbie's kitchen window, I could see several of our residents had come outside. Word was spreading fast in a community this small. I saw an older man talking animatedly with a young family, and a woman was standing in her doorway with what looked like a baseball bat. "We need to get everyone together," I said. "Community center. Right now." The community center was a generous name for the converted double-wide trailer that served as our meeting hall, laundry facility, and storm shelter. It had thick walls, limited entry points, and enough space for everyone if we needed to hunker down. As we walked toward the center, I noticed how quiet everything had become. No traffic noise from the highway, no birds singing. Even the wind seemed to have died down. The only sounds were our footsteps on gravel and the distant rumble of Evan's CB radio, which he'd brought along. That's when we heard the groaning. It came from somewhere beyond the tree line, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. Low, guttural, and somehow hungry. Not the groan of someone in pain, but something else entirely. Something that made every instinct in my body scream danger. Lucy pressed closer to her mother. What was that? Before anyone could answer, Billy Hendricks stumbled into view at the far end of our main road. But this wasn't the Billy I'd known for 15 years. This was something wearing Billy's clothes, moving with Billy's height and build, but wrong in every other way. His shirt was torn and stained with dark patches. His skin had a grayish pallor, and his mouth hung open slightly, revealing teeth darkened with what looked like dried blood. But it was his eyes that made my stomach turn. They were clouded and vacant, yet somehow focused with a terrible hunger. He moved toward us with shambling steps, arms hanging loose at his sides. There was no recognition in his face, no awareness of who we were or where he was. Just that relentless forward motion and those horrible empty eyes. "Billy," I called out, though every fiber of my being was screaming that this wasn't Billy anymore. "Billy, are you all right?" The thing that had been Billy Hendricks turned its head toward my voice. Its mouth opened wider, and that awful groaning sound emerged again. Then it began moving faster, not running exactly, but with more purpose and determination. "That's not Billy anymore," Frank said quietly, raising his rifle. "That's something else." As if responding to Frank's words, 3 more figures emerged from the woods behind Billy. They moved with the same shambling gait, the same vacant expressions, the same terrible purpose. One had been a woman once. I could tell by the remnants of a floral dress. Another looked like it might have been a teenager. The third was too far away and too damaged to identify. They were all groaning now, a chorus of hunger that made my skin crawl. "Inside," Jake said, his voice deadly calm. "Everyone inside the community center. Now." We ran. The community center had never felt smaller than it did when we crammed 23 panicked residents inside that evening. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on faces I'd known for years but barely recognized now. Fear does something to people, strips away the comfortable masks we wear and reveals what's underneath. Some became leaders. Others fell apart completely. Evan stood near the window, his military training evident in the way he positioned himself to watch the approaches while still addressing the room. "We need to face facts," he said, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "Whatever's happening out there, the authorities aren't coming to help us. Not tonight, maybe not ever." An elderly woman in the back started crying. "My grandson lives in Springfield," she said. "I can't reach him on the phone. The lines are all dead." "The phones went out about an hour ago," I confirmed. "Cell towers too. Evan's CB is our only connection to the outside world, and even that's getting spotty." Robbie sat in a folding chair with Lucy Reeser pressed against her side. The little girl hadn't spoken since we'd seen the footage on TV, just stared at the adults with those wide, knowing eyes that children get when their world stops making sense. Robbie stroked her daughter's hair and tried to project a calm she clearly didn't feel. "So, what do we do?" asked a middle-aged trucker from Lot 19. His hands shook as he lit his third cigarette in 10 minutes. "Just wait here and hope those things don't find us." "They're not things," Dolores Gunn said quietly from her corner. She'd been silent since we'd gathered, but now her teacher's voice carried clearly across the room. "They were people. Billy Hendricks has lived next door for 15 years. I watched him plant that garden every spring." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "But something's happened to them. Something that makes them dangerous." Sully Eckhart nodded grimly. "Whatever it is, it's spreading fast. I counted at least 8 of them moving through the trees while we were running here. More than what we saw an hour ago." The CB radio crackled to life on the table beside Evan. A trucker's voice, distorted by static, filled the silence. "Highway 89 is completely blocked. Abandoned cars everywhere. Saw a family get pulled out of their sedan by a group of them. Nothing I could do. God help them. There was nothing I could do." "Turn it off," the crying woman whispered. "Please just turn it off." But Evan kept the volume up. "We need information," he said. "The more we know about what's happening out there, the better our chances." Another voice joined the CB chatter. "Springfield's gone. Repeat, Springfield is gone. Military pulled out around 6 p.m. Whole downtown area is overrun. If anyone's listening, stay away from the cities. Head for high ground, fortified positions. These infected, and that's what they are, infected with something, they travel in groups now. Hunt in packs." My blood went cold. Packs. That implied coordination, intelligence. But looking at Billy Hendricks stumbling around outside, I hadn't seen anything that suggested organized behavior, just hunger and violence. "Lion," said a young mother from Lot 33, bouncing her toddler nervously. "What about supplies? Food, water, medical stuff? How long are we planning to stay here?" I'd been dreading that question. The community center had a small kitchen with a coffee pot and a mini fridge, but no real food storage. Most residents kept their supplies in their own trailers, and those trailers were scattered across 6 acres with no defensive perimeter. "We can't stay here long term," I admitted. "This building isn't defensible, and we don't have supplies for more than a few hours." "So we go back to our homes?" asked the trucker. "Too exposed," Evan said immediately. "Individual trailers are death traps. We need to concentrate our defenses." That's when the idea hit me. I'd been thinking about this all wrong, treating the trailers like obstacles instead of assets. "What if we don't defend individual homes?" I said, the plan forming as I spoke. "What if we use the trailers themselves as barriers?" Everyone turned to look at me. I could see the confusion on their faces. but also hope. People in desperate situations will grasp at any plan that sounds better than waiting to die. Most of the residents who aren't here have already fled, I continued. That leaves about 20 trailers unoccupied. If we could move them, use trucks to position them, we could create a barrier around a defensible core area. Evan's eyes lit up with understanding. A compound. Use the trailers as walls. Exactly. My maintenance shed has tools, chains, everything we'd need to secure them together, and there are 3 residents with big trucks powerful enough to move the smaller trailers. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone processed this. Then Sully spoke up. It's crazy enough that it might work, but we'd have to do it in the dark, with those things wandering around. Better than sitting here waiting for them to break down the door, said the trucker. Through the window we could hear them now. The groaning had multiplied, layered voices creating a chorus of hunger that seemed to come from every direction. I counted at least a dozen distinct sounds, and they were getting closer. Decision time, Evan said, checking his rifle. We move now or we don't move at all. The vote was unanimous. Even the crying woman raised her hand. We organized quickly. Evan would coordinate the defense, positioning our armed residents at key points. Sully, the trucker from Lot 19, and a construction worker from Lot 8 would handle the truck operations, moving trailers into position. I would direct placement, using my knowledge of the park's layout to create the most defensible configuration. The women and children would stay in whatever secure structure we could establish first. Remember, Evan addressed the group as we prepared to leave. These aren't people anymore. I don't know what's happened to them. But Billy Hendricks, the Billy we knew, is gone. What's wearing his face will try to kill you without hesitation. Don't let sentiment get you killed. We extinguished the lights and opened the door. The night air hit us like a physical thing, cold, carrying the smell of something rotting and the sound of dragging feet. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see shapes moving between the trailers. Too many shapes. Evan raised his rifle and fired twice. The reports echoed across the park, and 2 figures dropped near Lot 15. But the muzzle flashes had revealed something terrifying. There were infected scattered throughout our community, more than we'd realized. They turned toward the sound of gunfire with that horrible coordination, beginning to converge on our position. Move, I hissed. We split into our assigned groups. The truck crews ran for their vehicles while Evan and our other armed residents, including Dolores, who'd produced a 357 revolver from her purse, took defensive positions. I sprinted toward my maintenance shed, keys jingling in my hands. Behind me, I could hear more gunfire, the roar of diesel engines starting up, and that awful groaning getting louder and more numerous. The shed door stuck, warped from humidity and age. I threw my shoulder against it just as something grabbed my arm from behind. I spun to find myself face to face with what had once been a teenage boy. His school jacket was torn and bloody, his face slack except for those terribly focused eyes. He lunged for my throat, mouth opening to reveal teeth stained dark. I managed to get my forearm up, blocking his bite, but his fingernails, grown long and sharp, raked across my cheek, drawing blood. A gunshot cracked the air, and the thing wearing the teenager's body crumpled. Dolores' gun stood 20 feet away, smoke rising from the barrel of her revolver. "Thank you," I gasped. "Save it for later," she said coolly. "We've got work to do." I got the shed open and started hauling out chains, cables, and my portable welding kit. The sound of moving trailers filled the night, grinding metal, revving engines, and the occasional crash as furniture shifted inside the mobile homes. The first truck, driven by Sully, was pushing a small single-wide from Lot 24 toward the center of the park. The plan was simple: create a circle of trailers around the community center, with the largest double-wides forming the outer perimeter and smaller units filling gaps. But simple and easy are 2 different things. The infected were drawn to the noise like moths to flame. I watched Sully's truck push the trailer across the gravel road while 3 of them shambled alongside, trying to claw their way up to the cab. One had been an elderly man once. I could see the remnants of a cardigan hanging from his shoulders. His face had been partially torn away, revealing bone beneath, but he moved with the same relentless purpose as the others. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as our defenders tried to clear a path for the truck crews. The construction worker from Lot 8 was moving a double wide with his F-350, but he'd gotten too close to the tree line. 5 infected emerged from the darkness surrounding his truck. I saw him try to gun the engine, but the trailer's weight made acceleration slow. They reached the truck before he could escape. One crawled onto the hood, pressing its face against the windshield. The worker swerved wildly, trying to throw it off, but the movement sent the trailer skidding sideways. The whole rig jackknifed, blocking our planned placement area. "Change of plans," I shouted to Evan, who was methodically shooting infected as they wandered into range. "We'll have to work around the blocked area." He nodded, never taking his eyes off his targets. "How long do you need?" I looked at the chaos around us. Trucks struggling to maneuver in tight spaces, infected closing in from all sides, residents with weapons firing at anything that moved. The night was filled with diesel smoke, gunpowder, and the stench of decay. 20 minutes, I called back, maybe 30. "You've got 10, he replied, dropping another infected with a headshot. "Ammo won't last longer than that." The next few minutes blurred together in a nightmare of improvisation and desperation. We abandoned the circular plan, instead creating an L-shaped barrier using whatever trailers we could move quickly. The construction worker managed to get his truck free, though his windshield was spiderwebbed with cracks from the infected's attempts to break through. 3 more residents revealed hidden weapons: a sawed-off shotgun, a hunting rifle, and an old .38 police special. But ammunition was becoming a serious concern. Every shot had to count. Lucy Reeser, who hadn't spoken all evening, suddenly pointed toward the tree line. "More coming," she said in a small voice. She was right. A whole group of them was emerging from the woods. A dozen. Maybe 15 infected shambling toward our position. Among them, I could make out what had once been a woman in a nurse's uniform, a man in mechanic's coveralls, and something small that I didn't want to look at too closely. "Perimeter's almost closed," Sully called from his truck. He was positioning the last trailer, a small single wide that would complete our makeshift fortress. But the approaching horde would reach us before he could finish. "Everyone inside," Evan commanded. "Fall back to the compound." We ran for the gap between trailers, our small group of defenders firing as we retreated. The infected moved faster now, as if sensing their prey was trying to escape. Their groaning rose to an almost deafening volume, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Dolores stumbled, her arthritis making the sprint difficult. 2 infected were closing on her, their arms outstretched. I spun back, grabbing her elbow to help her along. "Leave me," she gasped. "I'm slowing everyone down." "Like hell," I replied, practically carrying her toward safety. Robbie appeared beside us, her .38 in her hands. She fired 3 shots at the nearest infected, hitting it twice in the chest and once in the shoulder. The bullets barely slowed it down. "The head!" Evan shouted from behind us. "You have to hit the head!" Robbie's 4th shot took the top of the thing's skull off. It dropped immediately, but the second infected was still coming. I could smell it now, the sweet, cloying odor of rotting meat mixed with something chemical and sharp. We reached the gap just as Sully's truck completed the perimeter, sealing us inside our improvised fortress of mobile homes. The infected hit the barrier seconds later, their fists pounding against aluminum siding, their groaning vibrating through the walls. Inside our compound, we had the community center, my maintenance shed, and about 2 acres of space. Not much, but it was defensible. The trailers weren't perfectly aligned, but chains and cables secured the gaps between them, and the whole structure felt solid enough to hold against anything that couldn't think strategically. "Everyone okay?" I called out, taking a quick head count. 21 residents, including Lucy Reeser, who was clinging to her mother like a lifeline. "We're alive," Evan said grimly. "But this is just the beginning. The real test comes when they figure out we're trapped in here." As if responding to his words, the pounding on the walls intensified. Through gaps in the barriers, I could see pale faces pressed against windows, hands scratching at glass, mouths opening and closing in silent screams of hunger. Outside our fortress, The groaning continued. It seemed to be coming from everywhere now, not just the infected we'd seen, but others, drawn by the noise and smell of living people concentrated in one small area. We'd built ourselves a stronghold, but we'd also built ourselves a trap. The longest night of our lives was just beginning. By midnight, our fortress of trailers had become exactly what we'd hoped, an impregnable wall of steel and aluminum that kept the infected at bay while giving us the high ground advantage. The barricade held better than I'd dared to imagine. The trailers, chained and secured together, formed a solid perimeter around our central compound. What made it truly effective wasn't just the barrier itself, but the fact that we could fight from the rooftops, raining down death on anything that tried to breach our walls. Evan had positioned our defenders strategically along the tops of the trailers, each person responsible for a section of the perimeter. From up there, we had clear sight lines and could coordinate our attacks. The infected could see us, could smell us, but they couldn't reach us. "Count off," Evan called out across our makeshift ramparts. "Sound off if you're running low on ammunition." The responses came back from around the perimeter. Sully on the eastern wall had 6 rounds left. Dolores, positioned on the tallest double-wide, still had 8. The trucker from Lot 19 was down to his last 3 shells. I was crouched on the roof of the trailer that formed our northern barrier, watching a group of infected mill around below. They'd been there for 2 hours, groaning and clawing at the aluminum siding, but they couldn't figure out how to get up to us. That was the beauty of our position. These things might have been human once, but whatever had infected them had stripped away intelligence while leaving only hunger and basic motor function. They could see us, could hear us, but they couldn't solve the problem of vertical space. "Lion," Robbie's voice carried from the western wall, where she was keeping watch with Lucy Reeser pressed close beside her. I count at least 30 more coming up the access road. I looked where she pointed and felt my stomach sink. A shambling horde was approaching from the direction of Highway 89, drawn by the sounds of our earlier battle. They moved with that horrible coordination, not organized exactly, but all focused on the same goal. "That's going to put us over 100, I called back to Evan. "Doesn't matter," he replied, checking his rifle scope. "Let them come, they can't get up here and we're not running out of roof." But ammunition was another story. Between all of us, we had maybe 40 rounds left. Enough for selective shots, but not enough for the sustained firefight that was coming. That's when Sully had his brilliant idea. "Lion," he called from his position, "you still got that gasoline stored in the maintenance shed?" 20 gallons, maybe 25, I replied. "And glass bottles, mason jars, beer bottles, anything like that?" I thought about the recycling bin behind the community center, the empties that residents had been dropping off for weeks. "Yeah, probably 50 or 60 bottles," Sully grinned, his weathered face creasing with dark satisfaction. Time to cook some zombies. It took us an hour to prepare our arsenal. We worked in shifts, some maintaining watch while others gathered supplies and assembled improvised incendiary devices. Mason jars filled with gasoline, beer bottles stuffed with strips of cloth soaked in fuel. Basic Molotov cocktails, but devastatingly effective against targets that didn't have enough brains left to run from fire. The construction worker, I never did learn his name, had experience with demolitions and helped us create more sophisticated devices. "Pack some nails and screws around the bottle," he explained to Dolores as she worked. "When the glass breaks, you get fragmentation along with the fire." By 2 a.m., we had 37 improvised firebombs lined up along our perimeter, ready to rain hell on anything that got too close. We didn't have to wait long to test them. The horde that Robbie had spotted reached our walls just after 2:30. More than 100 infected, shambling and groaning, pressed against our barriers like a tide of rotting humanity. The trailers creaked under the pressure, but the chains held firm. "Wait for my signal," Evan commanded from his position on the highest trailer. "We want them packed together as tight as possible." The infected seemed to sense our presence above them. They reached upward with grasping hands, mouths opening and closing in silent hunger. Some tried to climb the trailer walls, but the smooth aluminum siding offered no grip for their broken fingernails. I could smell them now, That sweet, cloying odor of decay mixed with something acidic and wrong. The stench was so thick I could taste it, coating the back of my throat like syrup. "Now," Evan said quietly. The first Molotov came from Dolores's position on the eastern wall. The mason jar arced through the air, trailing a small flame, and exploded in the center of the largest group. Gasoline splashed across a dozen infected, and they became walking torches, stumbling blindly into their companions and spreading the fire. Then we all joined in. Bottles rained down from every section of the perimeter, each one creating a new pool of flame in the crowd below. The infected didn't run from the fire. They couldn't understand what was happening to them. They just stood there burning, their groaning taking on a different quality as the flames consumed them. The smell was indescribable. Burning flesh, melting synthetic fabrics, and that underlying chemical reek that seemed to cling to everything the infected touched. Lucy Reeser buried her face in her mother's shoulder, but the rest of us watched with grim satisfaction as our enemies were reduced to ash and charred bone. In 10 minutes, we'd eliminated nearly half the horde. The survivors scattered, but not from intelligence, just from the basic instinct to move away from the heat and light. "Reload and reposition," Evan ordered. This was just the first wave. He was right. Over the next 4 hours, we faced 3 more major assaults. Each time, the infected approached our walls in larger numbers, drawn by the sounds of battle and the scent of the living. Each time, we held our ground and burned them down. But the battles were taking their toll. The trucker from Lot 19 took a fall from his trailer roof while repositioning during the third attack. Broke his leg badly enough that bone was showing through the skin. We got him down to the community center, but he was out of the fight. An elderly woman who'd been helping make Molotovs caught a piece of flying glass when one of her bottles exploded prematurely. The cut on her arm was deep and she was losing blood fast. And then there was the construction worker. I noticed him acting strange during the fourth attack, around 5 in the morning. He was moving too slowly, sweating despite the cool October air, and when he threw his Molotovs, his aim was off. At first I thought it was just exhaustion. We'd all been fighting for hours. But when I saw him stumble and nearly fall from the trailer roof, I knew something was seriously wrong. "You okay?" I called to him during a lull in the fighting. "Just tired," he replied, but his voice sounded thick, blurred. That's when I noticed the tear in his jacket sleeve and the dark stain around it. Blood. Fresh blood. "When did you get hurt?" I asked, moving closer. He looked at the wound, then at me, and I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the infected below us, but fear of what I might do. "Couple hours ago," he said quietly. "One of them got through a gap. I thought I'd killed it before." He trailed off, but we both knew what he meant. Before it bit him. I should have called out immediately. Should have alerted Evan and the others. Should have followed the protocol we'd discussed earlier about what to do if someone got infected. But looking at this man, this person who'd fought beside us, who'd helped save all our lives, I found I couldn't do it. "How long?" I asked instead. "Don't know. Hour, maybe 2 before I turn." He looked at his hands, which were starting to shake. I can feel it spreading, like fire in my veins. The smart thing would have been to get him away from the group, to isolate him before he became a threat. But smart and human aren't always the same thing. "Can you keep fighting?" I asked. He managed a weak smile. "Until I can't." We fought the fourth wave together, him throwing Molotovs with increasingly unsteady hands while I covered his section of the perimeter. But I could see the infection taking hold, the fever glazing his eyes, the way his movements were becoming jerky and unnatural. When the attack was over and the infected were retreating again, he made his decision. "I'm going down to the community center," he told me. "Going to sit with the others who are hurt. When it happens, when I change, I want you to do what needs to be done." I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. He climbed down from the trailer roof, moving carefully, and walked to the community center where the injured were resting. I watched him go, this man whose name I'd never learned, who was going to die because he'd fought to protect strangers. 20 minutes later, I heard Robbie scream. I ran across the interconnected trailer roofs to the western wall where she was positioned. She was pointing down into the compound, her face white with shock. The construction worker was standing in the doorway of the community center, but it wasn't him anymore. The fever had burned away whatever humanity remained, leaving only hunger and the instinct to feed. He was looking up at us with those terrible, vacant eyes, and his mouth was dark with blood. Behind him, I could see movement in the community center. The injured people who'd been resting inside were getting to their feet, but they were moving wrong, moving like the things outside our walls. "He turned," Robbie whispered, "and he infected the others." 3 people, the trucker with the broken leg, the elderly woman with the glass cut, and the construction worker himself. All of them were infected now, all of them were trapped in our compound with us. "Everyone off the roofs," I called out. "Emergency meeting, north wall trailer, now." We gathered on the roof of the northernmost trailer, as far from the community center as possible. From there, we could see our former neighbors wandering around the compound below, groaning and reaching upward with grasping hands. "How many rounds do we have left?" Evan asked quietly. "Maybe 10, Dolores replied. "Between all of us." "Not enough for what's coming," Sully said, gesturing toward the tree line where more infected were emerging. "And now we've got them inside the walls too." I looked around at the faces of our group. 17 people when we'd started the night. Down to 14 now, with 3 more turned against us. Exhausted, low on ammunition, and facing enemies both inside and outside our fortress. But we'd made it to dawn. The eastern sky was showing the first pale hints of morning, and with the light came something unexpected: silence. The infected that had been pressing against our walls all night were dispersing, shambling away into the woods as if the approaching sunrise had broken whatever spell had held them together. "They're leaving," Lucy Reeser said in wonder. It was the first time she'd spoken all night. She was right. The horde that had seemed endless in the darkness was fragmenting, individuals and small groups wandering off in different directions. Within 30 minutes, our perimeter was clear except for the bodies of those we'd killed with fire. "Why?" Robbie asked. "Why now?" Evan was studying the retreating infected through his rifle scope. "Maybe they hunt at night," he suggested. "Maybe daylight confuses them, breaks up their pack behavior." It didn't matter why. What mattered was that we'd survived. "The 3 in the community center," Dolores said quietly. "We can't leave them like that." She was right. They'd been our neighbors, our friends. They deserved better than to spend eternity as monsters. We used our last 10 rounds to put them to rest. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also merciful. They'd fought bravely and died protecting others. That's how I choose to remember them. But dawn was still an hour away, and the infected weren't done with us yet. The 5th wave came at 4:30 a.m., and it was different from the others. These infected moved with more coordination, as if the night had taught them something about our defenses. They didn't just press against the walls randomly. They concentrated their assault on the weakest points. I was positioned on the eastern wall when I saw the problem developing. The bodies from our earlier Molotov attacks had piled up against the base of the trailers, creating a grotesque ramp of charred flesh and bone. The newer arrivals were climbing over their fallen companions, using the corpse pile to get higher up the trailer walls. "Evan," I shouted across the compound. "Eastern wall. They're almost to roof level." I could see rotting hands grasping for the trailer's edge, fingers scrabbling against the aluminum guttering. One infected, what had been a middle-aged woman in a torn business suit, was nearly at the top, her milky eyes fixed on me with that terrible hunger. I raised my pistol, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. Click empty. "I'm out," I called to the others, but their responses told me what I already feared. We'd used our last ammunition on the infected inside the community center. We were defenseless except for whatever improvised weapons we could find. The infected woman hauled herself over the trailer's edge, landing on the roof with a wet thump. Behind her, 2 more were climbing the corpse pile, a teenage boy with half his face torn away, and something that might have been an elderly man but was too damaged to be sure. I scrambled backward. looking for anything I could use as a weapon. That's when I remembered the machete in my maintenance kit, a heavy-bladed tool I used for clearing brush around the property lines. I'd left it on the roof during our preparations. The infected woman lurched toward me, mouth opening in that silent scream of hunger. Her business suit was shredded, revealing deep bite wounds across her torso that had long since stopped bleeding. She moved with jerky, unnatural steps, but there was nothing uncertain about her intentions. I grabbed the machete just as she reached me. The blade caught her in the neck, cutting deep but not severing completely. Black blood spurted from the wound, but she kept coming, her hands clawing at my face. I yanked the machete free and swung again, this time putting all my weight behind it. Her head separated from her shoulders with a sound like cutting through wet wood. The body collapsed, but I didn't have time to feel relief. The teenage infected was pulling himself onto the roof. The next few minutes were the most intense combat of my life. 3 infected managed to reach the rooftop, and I faced them with nothing but the machete and 20 years of maintenance work that had kept me in decent shape. The key was staying mobile and using the trailer's roof space to my advantage. I'd duck under grasping hands, circle around behind them, and take their heads off with quick, efficient strikes. The machete was perfectly weighted for this work, heavy enough to cut through bone and cartilage, sharp enough to make clean cuts. But it was exhausting, and more infected were climbing the corpse pile. "Lion," Sully's voice carried from the western wall. "I count at least 20 more coming up that pile. You need to get out of there." He was right, but I couldn't abandon the position. If the eastern wall fell, our entire defense would collapse. The infected would pour into our compound and everyone would die. That's when I had an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. "Sully," I called back, "throw me every Molotov you've got left, all of them." "You're too close. You'll cook yourself. Just do it." 3 mason jars arced through the air, landing on the roof around me. I grabbed one, lit the cloth fuse with my lighter, and hurled it down at the base of the corpse pile. The explosion sent burning gasoline splashing across dozens of bodies, both fresh and already decomposing. The smell was indescribable, burning flesh, melting fat, and that underlying chemical reek that clung to everything the infected touched. But the fire was doing its job, consuming the corpse ramp and denying the infected their path to the roof. I threw the second Molotov, then the third, until the entire eastern wall was surrounded by a wall of flame 20 feet high. The infected caught in the blaze stumbled around like walking torches, their groaning taking on a different quality as the fire consumed them. The ones still trying to climb the pile fell backward into the flames, adding their bodies to the conflagration. In 10 minutes, I'd eliminated the entire assault force and destroyed their makeshift ladder. But the effort had cost me. I was covered in burns from the heat, my lungs were raw from smoke inhalation, and the machete felt like it weighed 50 pounds. I collapsed on the trailer roof, gasping for breath. "Lion," Robbie's voice was tight with concern. "You alive over there?" "Still breathing," I managed to reply. From my position on the eastern wall, I could see the full scope of our victory. The fire had created a barrier that extended beyond our trailer fortress, forming a ring of flame that would keep the infected at bay for hours. Bodies were scattered across our property, dozens of them, maybe more than 100, all motionless and genuinely dead this time. But more importantly, the constant stream of new infected had finally stopped. The groaning that had filled the night was reduced to just a few distant voices, scattered individuals wandering through the woods rather than coordinated groups. We'd broken them, not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through sheer determination and the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. The fire burned for another hour, consuming everything combustible and filling the air with smoke that could probably be seen for miles. But as it died down, something remarkable happened. Silence. Real silence. No groaning, no shuffling feet, no sounds of decay and hunger. Just the normal sounds of a October morning. Wind through the trees, birds beginning to sing, the distant hum of insects. As the sun rose over Hill Ridge Trailer Park, we took stock of our situation. Our fortress of trailers had held. We'd turned a community that society had written off into an impregnable stronghold. We'd faced the impossible and survived. 14 people remained from the original 21 who'd started the night in the community center. 7 were gone. 3 fled before the real fighting started. Julian killed in the initial breach, 3 turned by infection. But we were alive, and we'd learned something important about how to fight these things. "What now?" Sully asked, looking out over our compound littered with burned bodies and broken glass. I thought about it. We had a defensible position. We'd proven our tactics worked, and the infected seemed to avoid daylight. There might be others out there, survivors from Springfield, refugees from other communities, people who needed what we'd built here. "Now we rebuild," I said. "We strengthen the walls, we gather more supplies, and we get ready for tonight." "You think they'll come back?" Robbie asked. I looked at the tree line where dark shapes still moved in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the morning sun. "Count on it." But I wasn't afraid anymore. We'd faced the first night and survived. We'd turned a trailer park into a fortress, and a group of strangers into a family. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The world had ended sometime during the night of October 15th, but for us, it had also begun again. In the ashes of the old world, we'd found something worth fighting for. Each other. And that was enough. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows where the infected might hide. Our fortress of trailers stood strong in the morning light, smoke still rising from the burned bodies of our enemies. We'd survived the first night, and we'd be ready for the second.